Good morning, and welcome to our lab on funders and funding. I'm Carol Waddy, and I'm really excited to be with you this morning to share information on how you can best partner with funders and better improve your grant process. I'm joined by two well-respected funding professionals and leaders in our nonprofit community. We have Suganthi Simon from the Arthur M. Blank Foundation, and we have Tene Traylor from the Kendeda Fund. And what I'd love is if Suganthi and Tene, you could tell us a little bit about your roles in those organizations and the work that you're doing. Suganthi, let's start with you.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I've been at the Blank Foundation for almost 7 years now, and I came to the role from public grant making in the federal government, focused largely on environmental sustainability. And the job at the Blank Foundation was really focused on quality of life, which include environmental sustainability, health and wellness, and community development. And I sort of stumbled in my way into philanthropy and learning about big foundations, and really diving deeply into the world of what professional philanthropy looks like, which is very different from large grants from the federal government or state government or local. And I started working in the West Side in community development, the West Side of Atlanta, historical neighborhoods there, and really delving more deeply into community development. So that's been my role for the last 6 years.
Great, thank you. Tene?
Thank you, Carol. Thank you, Suganthi. So I'm Tene Traylor. I'm with the Kendeda Fund. We're headquartered here in Atlanta, Georgia, and our reach is actually national and some international reach as well. We focus on work around people, so racial equity and economic opportunity and education transformation, and other areas of focus as well around environmental sustainability, climate resiliency, climate justice, girls' rights, gun violence prevention, just a host of topics that our donor finds interesting and poignant for her own philanthropic giving. I've been in philanthropy for the past 20 years now, starting off at a local United Way, and spent some time at another private foundation and the community foundation here in Atlanta, and now I'm at the Kendeda Fund. So I've spent pretty much my entire career through various forms of philanthropy, really attempting to create change at the most local level. But over the time that I've been at Kendeda, actually, that reach has not only focused on kind of our hyperlocal communities, but the work across the region, and some work nationally.
Thank you so much for that. So you see, we have professionals that have really spanned the globe in terms of the type of funding and grants and partnerships that are possible. So I'm really excited about the conversations that we're going to be able to have. As Jeff mentioned earlier, we looked at tapping various nonprofit professionals, probably many of you, we surveyed to find out what exactly would be most helpful to you in increasing your scope and your capability. And no surprise, funding and funders and understanding funders was one of the top topics that came about. So we'll dive into that right now. And what I'd love to find out from both of you is if you could tell us a little bit more about the mission of the organization and some of the strategic priorities that you're really focused on right now.
Sure. Yeah. So as I said previously, the Kendeda Fund, for us, our mission is around the sustainability of communities by supporting transformative leaders and ideas. So my work in Atlanta is really centered on how do you help support issues around economic opportunity, focused on how do you have a conversation around and support work around permanent affordability as it relates to housing, economic opportunity, and transit, public transit. How do you help increase that conversation? Our other efforts here that I oversee really is around education as well. So really looking at how do we have great schools, how are we looking at teacher quality, and then how do we continue to have parent and community engagement in that work and in those conversations. All of that work has a through line around racial equity with an emphasis on really supporting Black communities in the city of Atlanta and across the South. The other work in our foundation really is, it touches on that conversation and as well, but it really runs the gamut. We also have local work in Montana that we're doing with Native Americans and around land and community preservation with the communities in Bozeman and throughout the state. We also are looking at work around looking at climate sustainability throughout cities in the region. So we're partnering with groups that touch with municipalities as well, looking at ecological resilience. So it really is the breadth of work, but really looking at that through the lens of who are the leaders and where are the big ideas where we can be investing either in catalyzing or accelerating those big ideas for the future.
So bring the big ideas.
Bring the big ideas.
Awesome. Thank you, Tene.
Great, thank you. So the Arthur and Blank Family Foundation was started about 25 years ago with the mission of positively impacting people and communities and really bringing innovation to how we enhance lives and to try and achieve something beyond what people thought was possible for themselves and their families. And on the West Side, you know, we took that vision before the stadium was developed to start the West Side Neighborhood Prosperity Fund. We are about the positive transformation of people and place, and to do it holistically. And so picking up on some themes that Tene said, racial equity and justice is a big part of our work in Atlanta's West Side. As you know, they're historically Black communities. The Atlanta University Center is here. Carol mentioned there are people joining us from all over the place. So if you are not from the Atlanta area, the West Side is really critical to the city and its history, and to the nation as well, because it is the seat of our civil rights movement. And so that history and legacy really has played a large part in how we have approached the work. It's very holistic. We've looked at health and well-being, education, early child care, affordable housing, community retention, and economic inclusion and well-being. You can't pull the threads of intergenerational poverty without looking at the structures of history and racism as what's happened in the West Side. It didn't happen on purpose. And you know, no matter where you live, you know a community that has been left behind. And that's really the purpose and the focus of our work. Outside of the West Side, the foundation has many areas, including we have a large presence in Montana as well. And so we have a team there that does a lot more of our environmental conservation work and is going to be leading one of our new pillars, which is climate resilience as well. And we have some new priorities for the foundation just coming through the strategic plan, which you will learn more about probably over the next year and a half. It's going to focus on youth development, democracy, and then again, climate change and resilience. And our work on the West Side will be part of our legacy giving and programming that will continue because our commitment there is long-term.
So both of you mentioned big ideas, innovation. There's so much that we can do as individual organizations, but I know that also partnership and collaboration is really important. Can you tell us a little bit about other organizations that you've collaborated with, or some specific projects or initiatives that perhaps you've had some really successful partnerships?
So partnership is key to all of this work. You know, as funders, you know, we see one side. There's obviously the people who are the recipients of whatever the grants are, the people who are delivering the programs. My philosophy is that they are my partners. They're not just my grantees. They are the people I want to call and get in the weeds with. I want to go see what it is they're doing. I want to hear from the people that they are serving. I want to know they're present. Obviously, the larger you get and the further away from the work, it gets a little bit harder. Because I am local in Atlanta and the West Side is a few miles, I can pop over there, go into Westside Works, I can go into the At Promise Center, I can go into the On the Rise Financial Center, which are all grantees and partners of ours that we've funded over the years, and see, right? So I go and see what is happening. Are there people here? Are there people that we said we wanted to serve here? And if not, why not? And to ask the hard questions. And it's about that relationship that you want to set, that it's not about dinging people. It is not about just always hearing the successes. It's about understanding what works and what doesn't work and why. And then being responsive as a funder to also make sure that we can help really solve the problems that we intended to solve.
Tene, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Sure. The one thing I failed to mention is that the Kendeda Fund is, we're coining ourselves a limited life foundation, so we are spending out. So that means that we will spend out our core assets by the end of 2023. So we are aggressive, actually, in this conversation around collaboration, mainly because what we hope to see and do is provide ongoing support for the work that we've helped to support and catalyze and accelerate after we leave. So often, we actually just had this conversation yesterday in our team conversation, and my approach to my grant making is there's probably nothing that I'm supporting right now that I'm not doing either in partnership or alongside other funders. So when I think of collaboration on the philanthropic side, is how am I using my influence as a funder, particularly now, to help either educate, galvanize more resources, educate, influence while we're here. So my definition of collaboration is, from a funder's perspective, is how can I grab, Suganthi and talk about big ideas, or you, and how are we either co-funding and co-investing in that work together. The other thing I think that we're doing is using our voice differently around collaboration and working together. So yes, the funding is important. Yes, that's meaningful, but we're also using our voice to, again, attract other funders, talk to policy leaders, talk to business and corporate communities around ways that our funding has really helped shape and change the conversation. So while we have invested in a few partnerships and collaborations, I'll just speak very candidly about the role of philanthropy's ability to work together and co-invest and find ways to leverage our resources in meaningful ways.
Very good. It's really interesting when I think about two organizations that have been true conveners within the community. You come to mind. Right? Bringing other funders together, bringing other organizations, bringing nonprofits together. You've been model examples, really, of some of the work that can be done and the power of the work that can be done when you bring multiple forces together. So it really lends itself to what Rodney was challenging nonprofit leaders to do and challenging us to do as well. So it's great to have you all as partners in the community. So you also mentioned racial inequality. And can you tell me a little bit about what you've seen that is different in the funding community as a result of this past year? The social injustice that we've seen, the racial inequality that we've seen. Are you willing to talk about anything that perhaps you've seen in the funding community that has changed or shifted?
I would say it's been a good change and a needed change. As Tene mentioned, the three of us talk all the time about, how we can collaborate. One funder alone cannot solve these problems, nor should one funder solve problems, right? That changes power dynamics, which I think is really critical in the conversation about racial equity. So it's about the power of many and having uncomfortable conversations. So I think the work is just getting started, right? So last year, I know Tene and I, Carol and I were part of conversations of lots of money flowing into the city to various groups. And it was almost like for some of these groups, it was the first time that they were being seen, felt, and heard, especially Black-led Black women-led organizations that have been out there in the trenches doing the work for a very long time. They were often very small, that could not access funds from a foundation like ours because we have a process and we have a lot of paperwork. It takes time and energy, and you need an operation to actually apply. And I'm sure we'll get into that a little bit later about what it actually takes to apply. And so, for the first time, I think people had the conversations about if you set up a system that deliberately keeps dinging somebody for being small and being on the ground and doing the work, then, they will never have the capacity. Some of these groups don't want to grow to that size. So, how do we set the table so that they can get the funding that they need, whether that's finding other fiscal agents that share funds equitably, that we fund things equitably in a different way, we reduce our paperwork, we reduce our reporting, and that we really figure out how to partner in a different way. So I think the conversation started. It is continuing. It is going to be uncomfortable. It is going to be hard. And it really calls us all to continue to engage and be part of the conversation and to keep pushing ourselves to do something new, right? So innovation is fundamental to what we do. And so I think it's going to require us to keep looking asking a different question to solve a different answer.
So I think philanthropy was not inclined to, I think the philanthropy was inclined to listen. I think philanthropy was inclined to learn differently. I don't think they were inclined, and I'm not quite sure if we're still inclined to act differently. But what prompted a shift in listening and learning differently came from our nonprofit leaders. I want to be explicit in giving credit to folks like Heather Infantry, looking at funding that was not supporting Black arts organizations, and Rohit Malhotra and the Center for Civic Innovation for boldly, maybe even sometimes a little clumsy, calling philanthropy to the table and saying you can do more and you're missing the boat. And I don't think philanthropy is, by our default position, is willing to be uncomfortable. I think there are a lot of people in philanthropy that appreciate being comfortable and appreciate the privilege of that on a day-to-day basis. And I think the unrest and the pandemic and the call to action that was given was necessary, but I do not think philanthropy would have done it without leaders in the community calling for a different response. And so when I think about what happened last year, it came from our leaders in the nonprofit community boldly saying, we have nothing to lose, and you need to act differently. And I think as a response, that is what we're seeing from philanthropy. And so I think we need more of that. I think we need more people when you're talking to funders saying exactly what you need and being unafraid to ask those questions. You really have nothing to lose except, maybe you get funding, maybe you don't. Those chances were there before the conversation. So when you have the opportunity to meet with the funder and you're telling them the work that you do, don't shortchange what you need because you're afraid of making the funder uncomfortable. The goal is for us to learn. The goal is for us to provide resources to the community. So that's what, to me, changed last year. In my years being here in Atlanta, they've been, whispers of individuals in community, but this was organized, this was thoughtful, and this was adamant that we needed to shift. And so that's what you saw philanthropy respond to. And I think, to Suganthi's point, we're starting that, but we need a little bit of a nudge to make sure that we continue that, because the dollars are not necessarily flowing as quickly as I think a lot of our groups need them to be.
So thank you for that, Tene. It's good to know that those voices were heard, right? And I really appreciate your encouragement to our leaders, to everyone out there, to continue to have those conversations, continue to nudge, continue to speak loudly and boldly, right, about what's really needed and what you're seeing in the communities that you're serving. So it's good to hear. So now, I know folks also want to know about the grant process, right? And the relationship building process. So can you talk a little bit about what you are specifically looking for in grantees, in organizations that you will partner with, and your best approach for the process? So Suganthi or Tene?
Well, I say this to groups all the time. I tell them that you're doing amazing work. You're doing good work, but it might not be the right fit for the funding that we provide. So I just want to get that out there. And what that really means is that for every funder is extremely different. Because they are led by either a single donor or a board that brings their energy, that perspective to their grant-making process. So my suggestion for any group that is looking for funding is the first, although it's so much work, is to do the research and understand the funding, understand the people behind the money. Some of that is just through conversations with folks who've been funded by them before. And some of that is literally on the Googler, learning a little bit more about who they are and the type of funding that they receive. If you're a small startup nonprofit looking for investments where that's incremental to your progress, a funder that's giving away on average, $500,000 to $1 million might not be the first place to start. You might want to think about donors in your local community who are more proximate to who and where you are. I always refer folks to the local community foundation, the local United Ways, as a start when they are at least looking for opportunities to understand how to get those dollars. Oftentimes those institutions are gateways into private and individual dollars that you may or may not know about just by just a quick search of foundations that are giving. A lot of private dollars spend a lot of time being private, so they are not necessarily solicited by groups all the time because they feel like they have such limited funds. So I would just say that the first thing, and then the second thing I suggest that organizations do as they think about finding dollars is to look at your own organization. Find out where your strengths are, find out where your gaps are on both the program side and the operation side. So when you're going in and asking for resources and support, you're able to make a full case for who and what you are and how the dollars will be used. Oftentimes, folks come to us with very, very specific projects and, these one-off gifts and, but they are a one-person shop. They have big plans for how they do it, but they have no real, they're not able to articulate how they want to grow their organization to really meet the project and the problems that they want to face. So I would just say have a really clear understanding around who and what you are and start with the organizations that are closest to you to receive dollars.
Yes, so everything Tene said. And, I'll just stress, one funder and one funder, right? Every funder is different. It is a very relationship-driven industry. I mean, we're part of an industry, right? The grant giving, which is what has also contributed to some of the inequities in the system. So I'll say be very clear about who you are and what you do, and also be very clear about what that organization gives money for. So I try my very best to always have a conversation with whoever, when I get an unsolicited email or an introduction from somebody else, which is often the case, to try and have that conversation about what it is that you're doing, where you're doing the work. So I'll say one of the biggest things for me is I'll get people say, well, you're working in the West Side. I think we could bring our program there. And so to me, that's also one of those pieces that is so fundamental of, I don't want you to expand your program to meet my need, right? I might not be the right funding platform for you because you don't work in the West Side. That said, your program might be really good. But who else are you partnering with? Do you have the ability to partner? And that's a whole other conversations about nonprofits collaborating with each other because that takes a lot of time and resources. And That's a different set of capacity building. But if you need capacity building, that's a different ask than I want program support. And I think philanthropy is getting better about the capacity building side, funding the things that we don't, think of normally. But yeah, you might need a building, and you need to pay your rent and your staff and your overhead. And I think that conversation is shifting as well. So just being very clear about your ask. One of the other things that I often see are people who are very small but are asking for, a $300,000 capital ask. Well, we need to buy the house to be able to do the programming. And that is going to be a very difficult proposition, right? We have a fiscal responsibility as well to the institutions we're part of. And so you can imagine if somebody came to you and said, I just need to buy a house to be able to do something, you would have a lot of questions. So I think, being very clear about who you are, what it is you do, and you don't have to apologize for what you do or how you do it. It's really just about making sure that you understand what the donor's intentions are. And you can look, usually websites have past grantees. Sometimes we put on our website the amounts that we fund people. So do a little bit of that homework, and I know it takes time. And talk to other grantees as well, because that's going to be your other place to learn.
You both said it takes time. It's a little bit of research and work, but so beneficial to do that. Given all that you've shared in terms of the relationship building, doing your homework, making certain that the ask is a fit for the organization's mission and focus, what makes an organization stand out? So I've done all these things, but I really want to stand out from the pack. What are some of the things that you can share that might make an organization really stand out?
So for the Kendeda Fund, and maybe this is our fatal flaw, I'm not quite sure. We're getting out of town anyway, right? So, but one of the things that we do look for is who's leading the organization, like who's able to understand where the organization is going. The last speaker talked about being iterative and generative in the work and having a leader that understands their organization and then the world that they fit in. We often talk about transformational leaders, and that is probably the sweet spot for Kendeda. And I think what stands out is how well is this leader equipped to take not just the organization, because I think this is what Kendeda does as a foundation that I've seen that's unique to the other organizations that I've been a part of, is that they invest in a leader who not only understands how to run an organization, but the world that the organization is in. And they really grab hold to understanding that this is not just a great manager of a program. They're really looking at someone who understands their contribution to the changes that are aligned with our donors' interest. So I would think for the Kendeda Fund, that's a characteristic I think is unique and a standout to the type of leaders that we try to wrap our arms around. I was thinking as you were asking this question, Georgia experienced this wave of Black women leaders during, last year and over the past couple of years. And they're it's almost like people think they came out of nowhere. And they've been working for 10, 20 years on the work that they've been doing. And they were prepared for the moment. And I think that's just really important to understand, is that this work in community is living work. It's changing work. And, if you're committed to the work will happen whether or not you're, doing it, day to day and making it work and until your time has come. And so I would just like to just lift that up too. Sometimes it's around, when the world is ready for your work to be highlighted, you'll get the investments and the attention that you deserve, and it's probably needed to accelerate the work. And sometimes it's just that as well, is timing.
It's timing.
Yeah. No, I would agree 100%. And it's not about being a charismatic leader, right? It is really more about, it's not just about storytelling. It is about being able to be present, take care of yourselves, and to engage in that continued relationship. I know just it's never that I have one conversation and I say, oh, I'm going to invite this person to apply. It's about a series of conversations, learning about their work, saying, oh, who else did you work with? And it's not to check in on that person, but it's just to say what worked well, what didn't work well. You know, if we're going to replicate a program, how do I think about context? How do I bring that leader into the context that I'm trying to fund? So it's a little bit of a dance, and you got to give yourself some time and space. And how else do you engage other people in your organization, whether they're informal or formal in your organization? So, you know, I've had the opportunity to also work with organizations who they're working directly with residents, and they bring them to the meeting, right? And they say, well, I want you to hear directly from this person about what worked well and what didn't work well. So that person wasn't there to showcase, like, this organization is amazing, you should fund them. They were there saying, you know, I went through 10 rounds with them and I couldn't get this rental assistance, but I understand now, like, what I needed to do. I understand why they have this paperwork, you know, and it's a conversation. So I will just stress again, it's to me, it's more than one person. But that one leader needs to be present and be able to engage for a period of time. And, you know, some things that we've seen over the last year is that, especially the smaller organizations, a lot of these women, especially Black women, have experienced a tremendous amount of burnout and trauma, right? And Tene is just whispering trauma to me, and so I'm saying that out loud and giving voice to that because the needs in community have been so great. And it's the idea if you don't scramble now to get your funding, you know, you won't be able to serve. And so I just want to hold that space too of, you know, keep calling those funders that you've started a conversation with, try and bring them back to the table, and make sure you take care of yourselves in this process too.
I love that. Take care of yourselves in this process. Really important. So one of the things that I forgot to do at the very beginning of this conversation was to remind everyone out there to drop their questions in the chat. But the good news is you did it anyway without my prompting you. So we have a few quick questions, if you don't mind, that I want to ask. So we have a question from Elizabeth Omalami. And her question, friend out there, we know you, Elizabeth, are philanthropists willing to fund staffing now more than in the past for capacity building?
Yeah, I think the field has gotten beat up about our inability to fund the unsexy stuff. I do think more philanthropic organizations are learning how to provide unrestricted support. And a part of that, to be honest, is just rooted in, I'm going to say it, you know, philanthropy's patriarchal system of not believing that the groups know what's best for them. And I think we're dismantling that very slowly. And a part of that is, you know, having philanthropy, and more philanthropic institutions are learning to let that go and provide more unrestricted support. So yes and no, and it's taking more time. So yes and no.
Okay.
Yes, Mrs. Omalami, I agree. It's going to take some time, and I'll say, you know, just having the information ready about the kind of growth you need, the types of people you need. That's a good conversation starter to have, right? We know a lot of people are saying, well, we need a development person, right, to be able to do this, to apply for grants. We've seen organizations talk about shared development people, or saying, can we start with a consultant? And so, again, it's taking those small bites, and I know that doesn't feel super comfortable when we're talking about the change that philanthropy needs to make, but it is going to be, you know, turning the ship. I'm certainly trying on the inside.
Absolutely. Fair enough. So we have one more question. This is from Juliana, I think it's Njoku. And the question is, what are the best steps to establishing relationships with foundations and donors? You talked about the importance of that and understanding them. Are there any quick tips on establishing the relationships the right way? Right.
Don't corner me at the grocery store. Let me just say that. Unless you have a good recipe idea, I would also, I mean, that might be a reason. But I think the best way is, to be honest, sometimes, you're not your best spokesperson. I think oftentimes word of mouth, us understanding who you are through other people, is a great approach. The other is share with us, even though our emails are full, share with us, your newsletter, a quick note, ask for a 30-minute meeting. I think you have to take almost like a sneak attack, a multi-pronged approach to sometimes, because there's so many people. Imagine everyone on this call calling us tomorrow saying we want a meeting. That's how it worked. And so I think it's us trying to find the time and the space to give you the attention that you need. But I definitely think just be very, over time, just keep informing us. Send us the newsletter via email. Have folks tell us about who you are. That would be my suggestion.
And to do it thoughtfully, right? So if you want to talk to me about something that doesn't fit, it's going to be really difficult. I am always happy to try and engage in a conversation and try and redirect you to different resources. It's a question of time and the ability to do so. So be persistent and without being overwhelming, and it is a fine balance. And like Tene said, use everybody in your network to try and create the connection. And it might be one or two people in a foundation. It doesn't have to be just one person.
Great advice. One of the things that I always think about is establish the relationship, but honor the process. And that's a very fine balance. But I find that it's most helpful when organizations can do that. So it has been a pleasure to spend time with you both and to hear your insight. Hopefully it's been helpful to all of our participants today. And we'll see you in the community. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thought I was gonna break.